is the fact that we have people like Don Kasle, former CEO of one of the largest banks in Kansas. He's been a private investor for many, many years. Where's Bill Waldo? Bill Waldo, serial entrepreneur, both members of the Tech Coast Angels, one of the largest groups, angel groups here in Southern California. That's the quality of consulting that you will get from TriTech. And the beauty of it is, it's no charge. There's one caveat. The caveat is that I get to stand next to you and have my picture taken when you make your millions and you're employing 25, 50, 100 people. And we can write a success story and tell our funders about your success and about TriTech and our contribution to your country. That's the only thing. So the consultants are basically paying it forward. They're making a difference in the community, in the ecosystem, because they're at a stage in their life where they can, and they love helping you. So I welcome the opportunity to talk to you afterwards and talk to you about what TriTech can do for you if you're ready to take your business to the next level. But can I get a round of applause for Mr. Don Kasle? Be prepared for a really awesome workshop this afternoon. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Really know how to put the pressure on me. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Glad you're here. I have been part of Tech Coast Angels for 10 plus years now, and I'm in my 9th year with TriTech as well. And in that time, I've had an opportunity, plus going back when I started doing investing on my own in startup companies, which is now sneaking up on about 18 years that I've been doing that. So that being the case, I've probably seen, and I sat down and tried to calculate it one day, and I'm, give or take, right around 2,000 presentations I've seen over the years, particularly a lot with TriTech. And in looking back on those, I've come up with some issues that one needs to consider if they are going to have an effective presentation to go to angel investors. So I've come up with my 13 biggest mistakes that I've seen entrepreneurs make, and a lot of these, if you'll just turn them around and put them into the positive, will give you some how-tos. I'll tell you in advance that some of these are very obvious. And in fact, they're so obvious, you're probably going to say, why are you wasting my time telling you that? And the reason I'm doing so is because even though they're obvious, we in Tech Coast Angels, and I've seen this in the other angel groups, because virtually every angel group in Southern California, sometime or another, I've attended some of their meetings, and a number of them on frequent occasions over and above Tech Coast Angels. So I've seen this, and time and again, these mistakes are made. And time and again, people get up and make a presentation, and they're so wrapped up in making the presentation that they get unwrapped in terms of trying to put together some of the effective techniques that one should do and one should use in order to have an effective overall presentation to the angels. So that's kind of what this is about and what we're talking about today. And I will be very happy to take questions, but I'm going to ask that we defer them to the end because I think that perhaps will let things run just a little bit more smoothly as we move ahead. Okay, so let's go to mistake number one. And mistake number one is assidu. Assidu, what do you do? Okay, everybody got that? Now let's go on to mistake number two.
Speaking of that,
Assidu is probably the worst thing that you can have happen to you. You get up and you present to the angels. And I have seen this many, many times. And you get all finished. And you've gone on for 12, maybe even 15 minutes. And you very happily look up and say, okay, that's my presentation. Now, does anybody have any questions? The first person puts up their hand and they say, assidu. Or they say, I'm sorry, I don't understand. What do you do? You've gone for 12 to 15 minutes and they don't have a clear idea of exactly what you do. And I have seen this numerous times. You know what you do. You eat, sleep, and live it 25 hours a day and 8 days a week. But the listener, whom you're asking to write a check, doesn't have a clear idea. They probably know what field you're in. They probably know a little bit about it. But if it's something that is totally obvious, then that makes it very simple. And a lot of the times then this would not even be a factor. But you'll frequently have situations where you'll have companies that are in somewhat of an esoteric focus, and yet they don't do a good job in explaining exactly what it is they do. So it's important when you're describing that to people that you make sure it's clear. Now let me give you another key out of this same factor. And that is you're walking down the street and you meet somebody, or you're here at a TriTech seminar, and when this is over, you come up to somebody and you shake hands and you start networking, and they say to you, what do you do? You've got to have a short, snappy, brief way of saying to them what it is you do that's very clear. And I purposely emphasize the word brief because you don't have an extended amount of time. Tell me, what is it you do, Don? Well, do you have 10 minutes? Let me tell you about it. No, they don't have 10 minutes. They're not interested in spending 10 minutes. They want a quick, short, effective response. So it's very important that you work on this, and it's something that I've seen the ones that are really effective take the time to write it down, really craft it, edit it, redo it, and then memorize it. And then once they get it memorized, don't state it like it sounds like it's memory. Here's what I do, I'll tell you right now, because here's what I do, da-da-da-da-da. I mean, that sounds like a sing-song rhyme. So you can't make it sound like it's memorized, but that's what you want to have it done as, so that you can come out with an effective, short, succinct, effective way of saying what it is you do and getting their interest to find out perhaps a little bit more. Now, let's give you an example of what that is. Here's an example of one that I came across many years ago, and it was a company that evaluates for the soil in land for possible contaminants. And the reason they do this is because, as you're probably aware, when somebody does construction, either new or rehab, they frequently have to have an evaluation of the soil in order to get the building permit to make sure that there aren't contaminants there. And if there are contaminants within the soil, then it has to be properly cleaned and taken care of to get those contaminants removed so that they can go ahead and build or expand or do what they want to do. So here was a company that did just that. And they gave us their explanation of what they did. We evaluate and remove contaminated pollutants in subterranean geological levels with the most effective alacrity and the highest efficiency. Nice, clear, short, brief, succinct, to the point. Everybody understands it, right? Wrong. So they worked a little bit to come up with something better and more effective. And what they came up with was, we analyze and clean dirt faster, more thoroughly, and less costly than anyone. Now, I don't know from that why they do it. I don't know from that what their revenue model is. I don't know from that whether or not they are aligned with any of the government agencies or anything. But I know what field they're in. I know what we're at least going to be talking about. And I certainly didn't from the first one. So make sure it is clear to your listener of what it is you do. Mistake number 2, you did not get me at hello. How many of you saw Jerry Maguire? Okay, remember the scene at the end of the movie where Tom Cruise has been estranged from Renee Zellweger, his girlfriend in love, and he comes and he sees her, and she's at a party at her sister's house, and he walks in, and she's surprised to see him, didn't know he was coming, and he looks up at her, and he says, hello, and then without her even being able to respond, he launches into about a 2 or 3 minute soliloquy of how much she means to him and how important she is and how, quote, you complete me, and all the other very nice, positive things he has to share with her. And he gets all finished, and he looks up at her, and he says, well, say something. And she looks up at him and says, you had me at hello. Well, I want you to get your audience at hello, and it's very important to do that. A lot of times, when you get up, particularly if you're talking to a group of potential investors, a lot of times you will get up and you will start telling them about the operation or what you do, but you've got some wonderful trump cards. That is, some very great successes that you've had. You've got some marvelous things that you can share with them that'll really get their attention and their interest. But you put them so far down in the presentation that you didn't really get them at hello. And I'm not saying that you go into every plus that you've got, but not too long ago I saw a presentation where the individual came And he got up, and the first thing he said when he walked in was, "I'm so delighted to be here with you today. I'm coming off of 3 previous successes in startup companies. I've put $500,000 of my own money into this deal. We're currently in revenue to the tune of $300,000 this year. We've got 100,000 paying customers. I've got a patent that's been awarded, and I've got an award-winning team. Let me tell you about our operation." And right there, he's got my attention. Because it's very important for them to keep in mind, them meaning you all, the entrepreneur presenting to the angels, you've got to keep in mind that if you're going to a group of angels at a group angel meeting, which is what all the angel groups do, that is when they meet, they usually have multiple presentations that day. And when you're going to them, you have a very big challenge, and that is, not only do I have to like, as an investor, your deal, and not only do I have to like what it is you do and how you do it and all the other things we're going to cover here today, but I've got to like all those better than the other 3 deals I'm going to see today. Why? Because generally speaking, we don't invest in multiple deals at the same time. There's no rule. There's no you can or you can't. It's just that we do our own due diligence. We look at our own deals. And in my 10 years in Tech Coast Angels, I think there have been 2 or 3 times that I've chased 2 deals simultaneously. Usually I get interested in one. If I'm interested in that and spending the time to really focus on that, I'm not chasing anything else. There have been a couple of exceptions, but generally speaking, that's what happens. So my point is that you've got to really get my interest, and it's also on a comparative basis. So if there's a way of getting my attention because you've got a really key thing to share with me, throw it into your introduction when you're coming on right up front. You don't have to go into the detail about it. You don't have to tell me what 3 companies you invested in previously. You don't have to tell me what your revenue model was to generate the $300,000 in revenue you've already made this year. But you do want to tell me enough to get my attention, to get my interest, and to get me listening. Wow, I want to hear what this man or woman has to say about their deal, because they really apparently have something potential. So get me in hello. It's a very important thing to do and to keep in mind when you're putting together your framework and your presentation. PS does not come at the end, but rather at the beginning. And that's the problem solution, is what the PS stands for. It's important that we understand what the problem is and what you're solving it and why you need to solve it. Now again, sometimes these are just self-evident and you don't need to spend any time on it at all. If you've got a cure for a disease, the main thing is that we understand that the disease affects enough people that there's a good-sized market out there. I mean, it's wonderful for any disease cure that you come up with, but if the potential market out there is not large enough, then I, as an investor, may not want to put my money into it, even though I'm certainly supportive of what you're doing. So I want to understand the size of the market, but sometimes you get into something that is so obvious in terms of we have this kind of approach that's just earth-shattering in Alzheimer's detection, and that's enough said right there, because we all understand what that disease is about, etc., and the size of the market and so forth. But a lot of times there will be a product or a service that is not real obvious and not real evident right off the bat. And therefore it's extremely important that you have the problem solution early enough in it so that it's very clear to me, listening, that I understand what it is you're solving and why you're solving it in terms of the solution itself, as well as a well-articulated and explained problem. Let's talk about the 5 hows, because the 5 hows need to be covered in a presentation that you would do. And a lot of times they are not. So here's mistake number 4. It's important for me to understand how much money you need. It's important for you to show me how the funds are going to be used. Now, you don't have to break down, if you're asking for $500,000, you don't have to go into every 10, 15, 20, and even $50,000 spend that you anticipate. But if you're trying to raise $500,000 and if it's going to go to sales, marketing, and product development. That's not enough for me. I want to see on a chart how those break down, and I'll tell you why. If you tell me that you've got a product and it's going to go nationwide, and you're going to finish the development of the product and do sales and marketing with the $500,000, of which you're going to spend $450,000 in developing the product and $50,000 in sales and marketing, I'm probably not too interested. Now, I haven't gotten into what the product was or anything else, but to spend $50,000 in sales and marketing doesn't buy you a whole lot. So as a result, I want to see what the breakdown is in terms of the use of funds as well. It's fine to have some of it allocated to working capital. That's kind of a catch-all because you're going to want to have a little bit of excess fund in there as well. But the bottom line of the whole thing is that you want to show me enough that I understand how the proceeds are going to be used. I also want to know if you're going to need additional funding in the future. And if you're not, that is a plus for you to be sure you share with the investor. Why? Because if you come to me and say, I need $500,000 now, and it's quite evident that in the future you're going to need additional, and if you don't discuss that, I'll probably ask it during the Q&A. And so you're going to need another $1 million in 18 months. Then suddenly I've got greater risk in the $500,000 check you're asking me to write today. And the reason for this is that I write you a check for $500,000 a day, you take it, you do everything right, everything's going forward, but through conditions and circumstances beyond your control. Somebody else comes in with a better mousetrap or a widget that was unforeseen. Something comes in the regulatory world that outlaws or outdates the product or service you're developing. Something comes in that wasn't a case of you're not performing, but just were controls outside of your environment that came in and impacted it. And suddenly your business can't go forward. And suddenly, in order to go forward, you still need that $1 million. And suddenly you're going out of business and I'm out $500,000. Contrast that example with the example of the fact that I come in and put in the $500,000 a day, and that's going to get you over the hump and get you into cash flow positive and get you into growth, and you're going to be able to go from there. And if you need additional capital down the road, you're going to have receivables, and you're going to have ways to be able to borrow against it, not have additional dilution as far as bringing in additional equity holders, and at the same time you're going to be able to grow from there, and I'm not as much at risk with the 500 I'm being asked to invest today. So we as investors would much prefer a one and done. In reality, a lot of times the really successful companies do need to go back and get additional funding. We understand that, but a lot of times that funding can either come from debt, or if it does come, it'll come in a way that we're being so successful and we're growing so much, we need additional funding, and that's a much easier ask to try to get from additional investors down the road. So the bottom line is how much is needed in the future, and when is that going to be? Another thing that my antenna is always up on is when you have a situation where the investor is going to be asked to put money in today, and the entrepreneur goes out and says, in another 6 months we're going to need to raise another X amount of money. I'm nervous about that because if it's in 6 months, that means that the entrepreneur needs to start getting that additional round within the next 30 days. Because it takes 3, 4, 5 months sometimes to get something accomplished. So that means that my entrepreneur is a full-time, out on the street trying to raise money person, and not an individual who's in there running the company, which is what I want them to be doing so that they build it up and move it forward. Because once they commit to having to go out to the market again, it becomes a very, very time-consuming endeavor. So when are they going to need that additional funding is also very critical. How do you make money? What's your revenue model? A lot of times that is not clearly explained. And we need to understand how it is you make money and how you go about doing that and who your customer is. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a moment. And then, how much revenue have you already achieved? Sometimes you've got a very bright story to tell there and it doesn't get told. So that's something that's frequently left out of a presentation as well. And it's very important, if you're into revenue, you let us know what that is and what your track has been accordingly. So be specific in discussing your use of funds, and be clear on explaining your revenue model. Those are two of the areas that sometimes go for one in that regard. This little piggy went to market. What is your market size? You've got to be accurate. Now let me give you an example of that. I'm going to invent a new app for smartphones. And this is really going to be a creative app. And I'm out soliciting you as investors to put money into my app. And one of you asked me, well, what's your market size? And I say, well, gosh, there's 1.4 billion smartphones out there in the world. So any one of those could use this, so potentially my market's 1.4 billion. And you say, well, Don, that's fine, but tell me, are you going to put this on both the Android and the Apple platforms? I say, no, I'm only going to do it with Apple. It's going to be iOS. Because the Apple user is really designed very much, is the kind of person that will really gravitate to this application, and it's very intuitive the way Apple products are. So I'm just going to limit this to Apple. And you say, well, okay, Don, how many Apple phones out there? You said 1.4 billion was your market size. And I said, well, Apple phones, there's about 300 million out there. So suddenly, I've gone from a total addressable market, or TAM, of 1.4 billion, to a SAM, the serviceable available market, of 300 million. And you say, well, that's great, Don. Now, are you going to have this in multiple languages? Well, no, I'm only going to put it in English. Well, Don, how many Apple users of those 300 million speak English? And the answer is about half. So suddenly, my market size has gone to 150 million from the 300 million from the 1.4 billion. Now, 150 million is still a nice sized market. But you might be surprised at the number of people that get up in front of angels and say to them, my market is 1.4 billion, if they were using that example. And that ain't true. So it's very important when you're talking about your market size that you have it accurately reflected. And that's why I give you the example that I just did. Number 6, in terms of mistakes, is understanding customers versus constituencies. You know the difference because you have to address both, but they both take different marketing strategies. Now let's talk about that for a minute. Let me give you an example of a company. This company recognizes that colleges and universities have to go out and recruit a lot of them on a nationwide basis. But it's very expensive, particularly for some of the smaller schools, to go all over the country and to go to various high schools and do presentations on why you should go to XYZ college. But one way around this is to have seminars, or webinars if you will, where the high school student and their parents can go on to a computer and be in a position to attend the webinar and find out about the school, and even to the point where you can have Q&A and the whole bit. You understand how that works. And this has proven to be a very successful model for some of these companies that are in this business. Now the way they get these students is that the company works with the colleges and universities, and the colleges and universities in turn then work with the high schools, but they get assistance from this company in helping with marketing strategies to get to some of these high schools. And then finally there needs to be marketing so that the high school in turn can get the word out to the parents. So in other words, what we've got here are 3 constituencies. We've got one that's a paying customer, and that's the universities or colleges. They're the ones paying for this. You're not going to charge the high school. You're certainly not going to charge the prospective students. So the payer is the university, because they're the one that's coming out ahead on the deal if the student signs up, obviously. But you've also got the constituency of the high school, which the marketing to them is a different strategy. And then you've also got the constituency of the parents and the students themselves, and the marketing to that group is going to be a little bit different than the marketing to the high school. Because the marketing to the student and parent is just for a specific school or schools that they're interested in. And the marketing of the high school is the entire litany of group of these are all the schools that we can bring you and deliver through this webinar program. So different strategies for marketing and sales, different effort, and obviously only one paying customer. So a lot of times in that example, we will see a company come in and present and have a very well laid out plan of how they're going to market to the colleges and then universities, and then you say to them, well, that's fine, but then how are you going to get the high schools to go along with it too? What support are you going to give the colleges and universities? And they haven't thought a great deal about it, don't have a really well-defined, well-thought-out strategy to be able to aid the colleges and the universities in doing so. The really big schools that send people all over the country and have regional reps that are alumni in various places, they don't need this. We're talking about the hundreds and hundreds of colleges and universities that are much smaller, particularly colleges that are much, much smaller and that don't have that kind of a budget, don't have that kind of expertise out in the field, and don't have that kind of experience with in terms of some of the marketing strategies that I'm discussing here. So all those things in conjunction together, it's important for you as the entrepreneur to recognize the constituencies you have. They may not be paying customers, but they are critical to the process of it being successful. And a lot of times we find that the entrepreneur has not been focused enough on those constituencies to make the whole thing as successful as it could have been otherwise. Here comes one of my favorites. What's the most important thing that you can share with an angel investor? What is the most important thing? I got a mathematical formula for you here. Okay, here it comes. This will hopefully be one of your UBIs of the afternoon. What is a UBI? A UBI is a useful bit of information. Now, some of you, after hearing this presentation today, may feel that UBI stands for useless bit of information, and if you do, that's perfectly all right. But my UBI on this one is that TPCO is total proof of concept. I want to see a real proof of concept if I'm going to write a check. I want to know that the dogs are willing to eat the dog food. The dog food can be in a wonderful box that's attractive and gets great shelf space and everybody loves. The dog food can have all the protein and very little fat content. The dog food can be manufactured at such a low cost that the margins are huge. And if the dogs hate it, you're not going anywhere. So I want proof of concept. And the best proof of concept you can have, bar none, are 3 words. And those 3 words are, on the right side of the equation, those 3 words are repeat paying customers. It's one thing and very important to have customers. That means somebody's used your product. It's even better if they're repeat customers, because that means they've used your product more than once. I'm sorry, I said it a little bit backwards, and let me retry it, because it's really important. Most important thing, the first important thing is to have customers. The second thing is to have repeat customers to use more than once. But the most important of all is that those customers be paying customers. Because if they're a customer, they've used it. If they're a repeat customer, they use it more than once. But if they're a repeat paying customer, they voted with their checkbook multiple times. Now, a lot of times, your companies will be new enough that they will just barely have customers, if at all. Or a lot of times, your companies will be new enough that in order to get out some volume, you had to give it away or give it away at a ridiculous discount. And it really doesn't show that in order for you to really make money, customers will be willing to buy it at the established price levels you really eventually want to charge. And a lot of times you may have been able to sell it, you may have been able to sell it at the price you want, you've got customers, but you have a cycle. It's a 1-year subscription type situation. And you haven't been in business more than a year, so it hasn't been renewed. I understand all this. It doesn't mean the companies don't get funded if they don't have repeat paying customers. But it does mean that is the utopia, and that's what you're striving for, and if you've got it, flaunt it. Make darn sure your investors understand that you've got repeat paying customers. Because that truly is the most important thing. Because then the argument of can you get this thing to work? Can you get people to buy it? Will it be a success? You've already addressed that. So a big hurdle has been overcome if you've got repeat paying customers. And I frequently see companies that do present that either haven't emphasized this enough or at least haven't emphasized where they are in that whole cycle. So it's important to really make sure that that is well addressed and it's clear in there. Do you have competition? And the reason I've said yes, yes, yes is that virtually all companies have some form of competition. Now, I'm sure a few of you in the room could come up with an exception where somebody had the only company that did such and such in a product or service. And there are occasional exceptions to that, and I understand that, and I grant it. But by and large, when somebody gets up in front of me as an investor and says, we have no competition whatsoever, I get very suspect. And what you need to be prepared with is that most people that are angels that come into these meetings carry something with them. And it's either a tablet, or it's a very small MacBook or PC, or nowadays it's even a phone. And they pick it up and they go on to Google and they put in ABC to see if in that industry there's any competition. And they'll call you on it, sometimes to your face, sometimes only when they get to the members only discussion after you've left the room for them to talk about whether or not they want to pursue the deal. So you've got to be very, very careful about saying, I don't have competition. There are ways of putting your process or your service together that can make you very unique and make it that there's nobody doing exactly what we're doing. But in the field, there are companies that would have some similarity, and it's important to show them. And the way you show them is what we call a competitive matrix. And this is a very standard thing that you'll see in presentations that angels do, that angels have presented to them. And because we're used to seeing it, I'm a firm believer that companies like the ones represented in this room today need to incorporate that into their presentation. And the competitive matrix is simply, you list across the top the name of your company and the name of any other companies that you compete with. And that's your horizontal axis across the top. And then down the left side, your vertical axis is the various qualities or services or achievements that you have and that perhaps some of them have. And then you suddenly got a grid and you put a check mark in every one of those where it's applicable. So guess what? You're going to have a check mark beside you on every one of them because you're putting down the things that you've done and you've achieved and that you're very proud of. Now, it's fine for some of your competition to have one or two of those. Hopefully they don't have every one you do, and you want to put the most important ones first. So if you've got a patent pending process that allows you to do such and such far better and nobody else can touch it, or you've created some kind of an algorithm that is so unique and so forth that you're able to provide all kinds of analysis and so forth, that gets listed first. But you list the other factors so we can see just at a glance what the differential is between you and your competition and what makes you better, or what makes you faster, or what makes you less costly, or what makes you whatever it is in terms of the differentiating factors. I will tell you that if when you go to list that, if you've got a competitor and they don't have one check mark, then I'll respectfully tell you I don't think that's a competitor. Because if they don't have any check marks, then they're really not competing with you. So be sure in your competitive matrix that you make up that there at least is one check mark there for each name. But do you have competition? 99 times out of 100, the answer to that is yes, and therefore it's very important that you address it that way and not make the mistake of coming up with something that is going to be different. One of the things that I want to impart with you in this discussion today, which so far has been a monologue, but I look forward to having some discussion and some Q&A at the end. But one of the things I want to impart with you is the fact that, and I don't mean this in a negative connotation, but I'll just be real candid and upfront with you. Angels see a lot of deals. And as a result, and this is a little bit of a harsh way to put it, but we used to have an associate within TriTech who had kind of a harsh way of putting it, because he looked at a lot of deals outside of TriTech for him to really invest in. He was part of a fund. And he said, you know, I see so many deals, whenever somebody presents to me, I'm looking for a reason to say no. And so as soon as I see that reason to say no, I turn them off. And then I get a lot of email done while they're presenting. Well, that's not too polite, and that's kind of harsh, and frankly, that's a little bit outside of the bounds of what I am comfortable with or saying or doing. But it does have some merit from the perspective that, subliminally at least, we are looking for a reason of why that one wouldn't fit, to try to, you know, weed out the pack a little bit, and then we can focus on the ones that we really like and want to spend more time with, and so forth. So my point in mentioning all this, don't give them a reason to say no. And one of them is to say, we have no competition. That's a red flag in a lot of cases. Let's talk about financial pitfalls as the 9th mistake. You've got 12 minutes to present if you're presenting at Tech Coast Angels. And there's a number of other angel organizations that give you about the same amount of time. And you spend so much time in the presentation leading up to it. And I, for one, am a big believer that you want to put your financials toward the end. Because I want to understand the business, I want to understand what it does and how you make money and all the other features of it. I want to understand the team, which I'm going to talk about here in a moment. I want to understand all those factors. But nonetheless, I do want to see the numbers, but they make more sense to me at least. And I've got a banking background. I was a CEO of 3 different banks in my earlier lifetime. And I want to see those financials and I want to really understand them. But you spend so much time leading up to it that you get there, and sometimes we see the financial projections and they're up there for maybe 25 or 26 seconds. And then they go on to the next screen because they've run out of time. That's a huge mistake. So you don't allow enough time for it. Another thing is, because we ask for a 5-year projection, we get what we call a hockey stick as it relates to the revenue and the earnings that go with it. And we'll see a company that's going to do $3 million in year 1 after they get their funding in revenue. And they'll go from $3 million to $8 million in year 2. And they'll go from $8 to $20 million in year 3 to $85 million in year 4 to $210 million in year 5. And that kind of projection and growth you just don't see. Has it ever happened? Yes. Does it happen often? Very, very rarely. I mean, Google and Facebook and some of the great home run stories didn't have that kind of growth factors early on to that extent. So you've got to be very, very careful about making them so ridiculously upswing that you give the investor a reason to say no, that you totally turn them off. And that's where the hockey stick comes in. We want to see a company, and I'm going to generalize here, and this is always a little dangerous, and this is just me now. If you ask the same question to 5 other angels, you might get 5 different answers. But I want to see a company that has the potential to get north of 30, maybe even north of 40 or 50 million in revenue by the 5th year. But on the other hand, I mean, if it's going to get to 25 or 30, it still can be pretty unique and potentially interesting. But hopefully a little bit above that. But you show me with something that gets much above 200 million in the 5th year, and I'm suspect, and above 100 million, I really want to understand the numbers and why and what there is. There can be some justifiable reasons why that's a valid projection. I've written some checks to some companies that presented that, and in a couple of instances they're even coming close to achieving that. So it's not absolutely unheard of and impossible, but you want to be careful as far as how much of a hockey stick you have. And then the final piece on the financial pitfalls is valuation, valuation, valuation. Very simple formula. You want to make the valuation as great as possible so that you give up as little equity as you can. And the investor wants to make the valuation as low as possible so they get as much ownership as they can. Now, I will tell you that angel groups do not want 51%. Because we recognize, and I'm talking about professional angel groups now, we recognize that as soon as we get 51% of the company, we've killed whatever incentive the CEO and the management team had. So we don't want it. I don't want to go into a deal early on and take over the control of the company. So we're not looking for 51%, we're not looking for 49 either. Generally speaking, and it depends on a lot of factors, so this is a little bit like, am I trying to diagnose an illness and I don't even know any of the symptoms at this point. But generally speaking, we will look to be in the 10 to 15% on the low side to about 30 to 35% on the high side. But more importantly, we don't start when we set evaluation. We don't start with a percentage. We start with what we think the company is worth at this time. Now there are some formulas you can look at. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer that valuation in a startup company is 90% to 95% art and 5 to 10% science. And it's really, at the end of the day, valuation is determined by what I, as an investor, am willing to write the check for, and what you, as the entrepreneur, are willing to accept the check for. Because I might be willing to write the check, but I put the valuation up here, and you don't want it, and I respect that. That's part of the joy of being the entrepreneur. You get to make that decision of whether or not you want to accept the check because of the valuation that I, as the investor, am suggesting. And on the other hand, I, as the investor, don't have to write the check if you, as the entrepreneur, are creating a valuation that is so inordinately high that it doesn't make any sense at all. So valuation is a very tricky thing. It's a lot more than the discussion of what we can get into here today, and you really have to look at each case and each situation individually, and at the end of the day, a lot of it, as I say, is very, very intuitive. But nonetheless, you want to be careful if you don't come out with such a high valuation that you just absolutely scare people off. And that makes it very difficult, and and I'll tell you an interesting story about valuation. When I first joined Tech Coast Angels, which was a little over 10 years ago, I'm in my 11th year now there, we used to have a process where we would look at a company and they'd come to us, and we really liked the deal, we liked the entrepreneur, we liked everything about it, and we ended up with a term sheet, and we got there to negotiate it, and we went through all the terms and everything was agreed upon, and they would say, okay, now, just one little thing. One more and we're all done and the term sheet's signed and off we go and we're going to get you the money. And that little thing is, you've got a valuation of X and we want to take it down to 80% of X or 70% of X or whatever. And we'd get into it right there, then and there, and sometimes they'd be willing to go along because that was the last little chink to get it done. And sometimes the entrepreneur would hold hard and fast and he or she would say, no, I'm sorry, we will not modify the deal. That's what the valuation's got to be, which again, I respect. So we would have worked all this time and spent all this effort and done all this due diligence, all for naught, and the deal blew up. So since then, we've changed, and we don't do that anymore. And when we see a deal that comes into us early on that's got a very, very high valuation that we don't think is going to fly, we let them know. And we say, if you want to keep that valuation, you're entitled, that's fine. But your deal isn't going to have a home with Tech Coast Angels. And so we're sorry, but we don't want to let you know right off the bat because your time's of value, our time's of value, and we're just not going to go down that road if that's what the valuation is going to be. So we address that issue head on now. And I don't want to give the impression from this, for those of you not familiar with TCA, that every time somebody comes to us with valuation, we just get into a tug of war and a fight with them. We've done some higher valuations for some very good reasons. I mean, we've got a company right now that presented to us that turned down $7 million to acquire their company. And they turned down $7 million, so we're going to have a hard time telling them that the valuation should only be $5 million. I mean, obviously, we want to play, we're going to have to play at a level north of 7. So we understand how these things work and what it is. And it's not a case that we want everything just down, down, down. But there does need to be some understanding about that and understanding in the market, which sometimes we find the entrepreneurs have and sometimes they don't. Number 10, the overall presentation. SP versus IP, and the IP needs to win. IP is not intellectual property. IP is investor pitch, and SP is sales pitch. The purpose of your presentation to angels is to get them to write a check. It's an investor pitch. And so often, and here's probably one of the most common mistakes I see, So often, the presentation is all a sales pitch with very little investor focus to it. It's got some. They did throw in the financials right at the end, etc. But they spent all the time trying to convince me why I should buy the product. Now, you've got to get into the product or service in detail for the investors so that they understand what it is that they're investing in. I understand it. So it's not a case that none of the elements of a sales pitch would go in your investor pitch. That's wrong. There will be elements that go in there. But if the overall vast focus and vast leaning is that it's a really great sales pitch, the chances are it isn't a really great investor pitch. And you really need to make sure that the investor focuses are clearly in that. And so it's a huge mistake that entrepreneurs make time and time again. That's why the investor pitch has to win on that formula. Number 11, the starting team is not varsity material. When we get into a deal and we make a decision to invest in it, we as angels have to really, really like the horse. What's the horse? The horse is the company. We've got to like the space it's in, we've got to like its revenue model, we've got to like its competitive position, we've got to like all the different factors that make that company unique and special and worthy of our attention. So we have to really, really like the horse. But we've got to be in love with the jockey. The jockey is far more important than the horse. I can show you deals that we've looked at that we almost loved the horse and found the jockey so mediocre we ran the other way. Because one of the reasons why it's so important to be in love with the jockey is that whatever you tell us your revenue model is going to be, whatever you show us your financials are going to be for 5 years, whatever you talk about the way that it's all going to roll out and happen, we know from experience that's wrong. It's not going to be that way. Why? Because life is never 100% predictable. And we understand that. What we want to do is have confidence in the entrepreneur because he or she is going to need to pivot, and to pivot effectively and to pivot creatively. And therefore, we've got to fall in love with the jockey. So the purpose of my emphasizing that is that when you're introducing the team, a couple of things that are very, very critical. First of all, this is not a time to be modest. If you've got some successes, we want to hear them. If you've done this before, we want to know. If you did it 3 times before and 1 was an abysmal failure and 2 were very successful, that's okay. You learn from mistakes, and we understand that. We've all made them. So that too is okay. We want to know why you are uniquely qualified and what there is in your background that uniquely qualifies you to run this company at this time successfully. So if you're in a company and you've come up with some very creative approach with software, we need to know what in your background uniquely qualifies you to run a company in this field at this time effectively. What experience you may have with some of the customers you could be calling on, or what you've done in creating some of the processes that you're going to be utilizing or expanding. So it's very, very important that you clearly and effectively tell us what in your background uniquely qualifies you as the CEO. And you want to spend more time talking about yourself than anybody else on your team. Because the critical thing is that we're investing in you as the entrepreneur and the CEO. Now, when you give us your management team, it's okay to admit management gaps. If you show us an org chart and you don't have anybody to run sales and marketing, my suggestion is if you recognize you're going to need them, and you recognize you're going to take part of the proceeds from the funding and go out and get a top-notch sales and marketing person, put into the org chart sales and marketing TBD, to be determined, and say we're going to use the part of the funding for the filling of this position, which you would have had in your sheet when you were talking about the use of proceeds. So it's very important that we understand that you understand where you might have gaps in your management team. So that is That is true as well. But please don't forget the importance of the fact that we do bet on the jockey and that you really want to show what is unique in your background that qualifies you to run this company at this time in an effective way. Number 12. That's all, folks. I'm probably showing my age here, but way back when, Porky Pig used to have cartoons. And at the end of it, you do the da-da-da-da, that's all, folks. I can't do it anywhere decently. I know you people that do it imitating very well, and I probably ought to record them sometime. In any event, when you get to the end of your presentation, you've given the slide and you don't have any kind of a wind-up or conclusion. You just replayed what was on the last slide that you showed. I'll now take questions and answers. Thank you. That sort of leaves me hanging. You want a conclusion. And I'll tell you what you want in your conclusion. It's some things, plural, you have already covered. What you want is a short bullet list of 5, 6, 7 points that you've already covered that you want to re-emphasize with me that are the 7 reasons why I shouldn't go another minute without writing you a check. And you've already covered these, but you're putting them up there to do. We're already in revenue, we've got X number of customers, we've got this patent pending, or we've got this patent issue, etc. And you list them in very short, succinct order. Not long, wordy. None of your slides should be long and wordy. One of the things we work with in TriTech is how to put those slides together in an effective way, which is a whole other lecture for another day. But in any event, you have a conclusion that you list, and you put up at the top there, reasons to invest in ABC, or whatever the name of your company is. And you list those one under the other. And then, when you're finished, that slide is the last one that stays up there. You don't go with a big slide that says thank you and your name. If you want to put your name at the bottom of it, that's fine. And you certainly want to have the name of your company so that people know. But you keep that slide up there. Why? Because maybe you'll get lucky and the first couple of questions that come to you, pardon me, the first couple of questions will be things that don't take you back to a previous slide you just showed, but rather just ask you something that you're responding to. In the meantime, that slide is staying up on the wall, and it's reinforcing. We call that free real estate. And you want that free real estate slide so that you can see and reinforce to your audience the 5, 6, 7 reasons why I shouldn't go another minute without writing you a check of what you want to emphasize. So you need a real conclusion with your slide and your presentation. And again, it's things you've already covered. So in planning the time that you spend in the presentation, you want to make darn sure that you make time for that so that you've got that and can do it in an effective way. And finally, the other big mistake that I've seen people make is they flunk the question and answer period. The first one is that you win every argument. You're going to have times when the investors are going to challenge you a little bit. And it's okay to kind of stand up for what you've said or what you've done or what you believe in. But you don't want to do it in an argumentative way. We had somebody not too long ago in one of our Tech Coast Angel meetings who was asked a question, and it was a question that frankly was covered in the presentation. But the guy responded, who was the entrepreneur, and he started off and he said, well, as I already told you, and then he went on and answered the question. Now, not only did he alienate the person he was talking to, he alienated everybody in the room. I mean, most of us recognized that the question had been, was being asked had already been covered, but perhaps not to the extent that the questioner wanted, or maybe the questioner just missed it. But nonetheless, that's no reason to try to put the person down. And it happens that the person that was put down was somebody that we all liked very, very much. So we all took offense with it. And guess what? That person didn't get much further in the screening process. So you don't want to win the argument, you want to win the war. And the war here is to get a check written to you. So you don't want to be argumentative in handling the Q&A. Second issue, what time is it? one of my favorite sayings. Wish I could take credit for having invented it. I asked you what time it is, and you told me how to make a watch. When somebody asks you a question, such as what time is it? Well, you take the mainspring in the watch and you pull it back a little bit, and then because you're telling them how to make a watch, which will lead to being able to tell them what time it is. In other words, you talk all the way around something before you actually get to the subject at hand. And particularly in Q&A following an investor presentation, you may have 12 minutes for presentation and 12 for Q&A. If you take 4 minutes on the first question in responding to it, guess what? You've only got 2 more questions you're going to get at 4 minutes a whack. And if you've got 8 people in the room with their hands up, you only got 3 of the 8 to ask the question. That leaves 5 that don't. And guess what? Those 5 are probably not going to be interested in having a follow-up meeting with you because, you know, they're going to lose interest. So the point is, you want to be thorough enough, but you've got to be succinct. And if somebody asks you what time it is, tell them what time it is. And be precise on it. We get a lot of times where they talk around and talk and talk and talk, and it makes it very, very difficult, and also it's a real turnoff for the listeners. And finally, it's very important when you're listening to questions that are coming from, and here's my final UBI of the day, and frankly, this is something you can use in your personal lives having nothing to do with your business. You can use this in dealing with family members and dealing with spouses or significant others, and dealing with all types of relationships you have, be they professional or personal. When you listen to somebody, that is when they're talking to you or asking you a question, or even just responding to you, you've got to be able to listen with 3 ears. And we all listen reasonably well with the first ear. The second ear is a bit more difficult, and fewer people have the skill set for that. But the third ear is the most acute of all, and that's the ear that very few people have really established an ability to listen with effectively. The first ear is simply, what is the person saying? Easy enough. The second ear, a little more acute, is what is the person not saying? But the third ear, and the one that if you can master, will get you a long way in relationships with others. The third ear simply is, what is the person trying to say? And so when you have an investor who is questioning you, if you can listen in with those 3 ears, and the same would be true for relationships as well, that can really help you go a long, long way. So there in about an hour are what my years that are about 16 or 18 now that I've been doing this will show you are the biggest mistakes that investors make, and I hope in the future you make none of them. Thanks very much. What questions can I answer? Yes.
First, great presentation. Thank you. The question is, how long are people given to make their presentations typically in front of angel groups?
Well, the Tech Coast Angels is 12 minutes, and I believe Pasadena Angels is about the same. Bill isn't in here now, so I can't draw on him a little bit, my colleague Bill Waldo, who is in some of them as well. I believe that Keiretsu runs about 12, Archangels, 12 to 15 is usually the time frame of it. Now, bear in mind, there's 2 different kinds of presentations. There's the ones where you get up in front of a formal group like this. In fact, Tech Coast Angels meets in this very room. And then there's the ones where you sit down with 2 or 3 people in a conference room and you present the deal. And usually those deals, more often than not, are a dialogue back and forth the whole way. So you'll start with the slides and you'll start talking about, and they'll interrupt you and ask a question. And that sometimes poses a very interesting question to the entrepreneur, and that is, do you answer their question fully then, or do you say, well, I'm going to come to that in 2 slides, let me finish this if I may, and then I'll come to that so I can answer it in greater detail. And my answer in terms of advising people is you got to do both. In other words, sometimes it'll be better just for you to answer it and to go freewheeling, and other times you can say, well, I've got a whole subset on that. Well, if I can I defer that for a couple of slides and let me finish this and then I'll come back to that. And then make it a point when you get to that and you talk about it to say, now, did I answer fully enough, or do you want to go into that even further, which reflects to them, yes, I was listening, yes, I know you want to get into that, and now I've attempted to do that for you.
In what order are those meetings? Is it a broader thing or a screen?
Well, no, the smaller meetings like that I was talking about are other angels you go to, other investors, where you'd be sitting down with them. In other words, there's 2 different ways of doing it. You go to a smaller group of people that you know, friends and family, or somebody calls and says, go see Joe Blow. He is interested in investing in your industry, and he'd be willing to talk to you. You go sit down and you talk to Joe, or maybe Joe has 2 associates with him, and you talk to all 3 of them. And that's the dialogue back and forth. The other is the angel thing. That's it.
Fantastic job.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Recognizing every deal is different. Can you touch on what the angel groups typically like, debt, equity, and about perhaps convertible notes?
Well, yeah. We have sort of, and then here's a generalization. I don't have a big no-no on convertible notes, but I've got some brethren in Techos Angels that really are not fans of them. And one of the reasons they're not is because they want to be able to know what the valuation is going to be today. And one of the things a convertible note does is, you're probably aware, is that it postpones that until the next round. Now, they've gotten around that a little bit by putting a cap on them, but nonetheless, that sometimes cuts it and it sometimes doesn't, because it suggests that's sort of what the value is, and if the cap is too high, then that's a turnoff as well. So I would say, parenthetically, that we probably, just to generalize, would prefer to see a preferred stock deal and do it on that way. But that's not to say we haven't done or aren't doing some convertible notes from time to time. Generally, the stuff that we do does have an equity play to it. It's rare that we'll just do straight debt with some warrants tied to it. That has happened on a couple of occasions, but not a lot. I've seen a couple of revenue participation deals where you can make 3 times your original investment and get some warrants to boot. And again, as you said at the outset, every deal is different, and it sort of depends on what it is and how much we love the jockey, frankly.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Don, given your last comment and the fact that you said earlier that evaluation is more art than science, have you got a formula that you guys use that you're happy with?
We don't have a formula per se. Now, I've got a good friend who's in Techos Angels. I should get paid for this, but unfortunately I'm not. Whose name is Frank Singer, and Frank has published a little book that's about 35 or 40 pages that you can get on Amazon.com, and it's called How to Value a Business, and it's by Frank Singer. It's a short book. It's only about 35 or 40 pages, but you can buy it through there, and it does give a formula. But the way I do it myself is more intuitive. I mean, and just sort of, if it looks right and feels right, and, makes sense, then you sort of go with it. And a lot of times what you'll have is you'll have a situation where the deal is already has a term sheet issued for whatever reason. It may be a case that we're participating with other angel groups. We do, within Techos Angels, we do a lot of syndication. In fact, we started something rather interesting. In this very room on the first Thursday of every month, we have 15 angel groups, including some DCs, that get together, probably close to half of them by remote internet, because there's cameras up in the ceiling here that can get on each person when they talk and so forth, and we have some pretty far-reaching audio-visual techniques in this room and throughout the whole code facility. And as a result, we do a syndication meeting once a month where we look at 4 deals that already have term sheets issued on the thing, and those have valuations all over the place. But the term sheets are already issued. So I, as an investor, it's not a case of, do I want to make the valuation lower than it is? I have no choice in the matter. It's a case of, if I like the deal, I write a check, and if I don't like the deal, I don't write a check. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned loving the jockey, and you mentioned two things that in some ways are opposite, where you're wanting someone to have expertise in that area, but you also wanted confidence with the eventual pivot that almost always happens. Where does that confidence come from, and sort of knowing that they can handle the expertise of the business, but also be able to handle a pivot that may be in a different area?
Well, if it's in a different area, then the question is, do they know enough, and are they humble enough to bring in people that will help them if it's a place that they can't go to? It's all intuitive. I mean, you know, the thing about angel investing is that with few exceptions, and I can think of a couple of people that are considerably younger that are awfully good angel investors in our group, so I wouldn't generalize this at all, but generally speaking, I think the longer somebody's been around and the more they've seen, probably the sounder they can make investment decisions, just because they've seen a lot and they've frankly gotten burned a few times as well along the way, because there's nothing like experience to teach. So it's just an intuitive factor, but they don't have to be an expert in everything. But what I wanted to see is what they do know, how much they know, and how much they're willing to bring others in and let them do it. I've recently invested in a company that I think very, very highly of the CEO. One of the things I like best about him is that he recognizes where he needs some help, and he's gone out and got those people and brought them in, and touched their ability very, very much. Yes, sir.
If I'm listening with my third ear, it sounds like you're balancing the valuation versus the percent of equity as a kind of a trade-off, correct?
No.
Not?
No.
Not in any way, shape, or form?
The percentage of equity to me is strictly the result of what the valuation is and how much we're putting in, and therefore you've got a numerator and a denominator.
But of course, that's...
I don't draw on it. I mean, if it's going to be over 50%, then that's a conversation we're going to need to have. But I do not, I have never on any deal I've done, and I've never within any TechCoast Angel discussion, thanks for bringing this up, because that's a very good point. I've never within any TechCoast Angel deal in discussion have ever seen the discussion of we ought to be at 35%, so let's change the valuation to get to 35%. It's never even come up. It's here's what we think the deal is worth as a total, and we go from there.
Objectivity, got it.
Yeah, and then it's just whatever the math works out. But people always want to know what percentage are you taking. But we don't go into it. Now, I'm not saying that all angel groups are the same, but in our case, and I'm not trying to toot the horn of TCA, but you know, that's kind of what we do. In case you're not familiar, TCA is the largest angel investment network in the country with our 300 members. So we've invested probably about, since 1997 when we were founded, so next year will be 20 years, we've invested around $180 million of our own money over the years. And if you look at follow-on rounds where VCs and other angel groups have come in for additional funding needed, we've been involved with, this isn't obviously our money, we've involved with about $1.6 billion in total funding deals. So we've done a lot and seen a lot of deals during that time. Yes, sir.
What is the confidentiality nature in the information presented by an entrepreneur? Talking about new businesses, they're talking about advanced technologies and everything else.
Great question. And let me address that in a similar way for both TriTech as well as TechCoast Angels, because it implies both, because we obviously see companies and work with them before they go to TechCoast Angels or Pasadena Angels. The people at TriTech are angel agnostic, even though 5 of the 6 consultants are all members of TechCoast Angels. We help companies to help them go into Pasadena Angels and Kritsu and Archangels and Private Capital Network and all the various angel groups. The confidentiality is the following. One is we do not sign confidentiality agreements. The reason for that is that a good confidentiality agreement is going to require not only I, but all the people within TriTech maintain that level of confidentiality. And while we don't talk, and I'm going to come back and emphasize this in a moment, while we don't talk about your deal, it's not to say that somebody might be familiar with what you were doing or know a little something about it and come in and talk to somebody else within TriTech about it, and it suddenly came in from that basis, but it didn't come out from us, it came in, and therefore it creates a problem. So as to avoid any issues at all as far as conflict, and particularly with an organization that has 300 members like Tech Coast Angels, we just have a set policy of not signing agreements. Now, having said that, the most important thing to us, bar none, is our word and our reputation. There's absolutely nothing more critical for any of us. TriTech, the people that are consultants are volunteering their time. We get paid a token, but it's barely enough to cover the gas to get here from my home. So it's a chance at this point in my life to give a little back because I've been very fortunate. And that's frankly why I do it, and that's why the other TriTech consultants do it as well. Similarly with Tech Coast Angels, we're not paid a dime for that at all. We just put our money in and hopefully make a little bit when it comes out the other side 10 years later, even though it's supposed to be a 3 to 5 year deal. That is. So let me finish that because this is important. Most important thing, therefore, is our reputation and our word. And our word is we don't discuss items that come to us, be it TriTech, be it Tech Coast Angels. And our reputation is that if we do that, the word's going to get out very, very quickly. And I'm not aware in the 10 years I've been at Tech Coast Angels that there's ever been a presentation that came to us on something that was highly, highly confidential and was strictly a first mover opportunity that needed to be maintained on that ever got leaked out, and never had a story written about or ever anything along those lines. So I appreciate the question so I can really address that, but that's kind of how we do it. And do you have a follow-up that you want to
Yeah, it was something that you mentioned about something that may halt a business. That just happened to me recently. We're building in very small sanitizers in every seat in an airplane. We have Boeing and Airbus and everybody involved in it, a lot of money. 3 weeks ago, the FDA came out, they banned some of the chemistries that are in it. So all of this, airplanes are built with this stuff, everything came to a halt. And that's one thing that resonated very strongly with me. And I think it's very important about how you assess competition and everything is what is that one thing that may stop you in your tracks.
Thank you. Appreciate your sharing that. Yes, ma'am.
I kind of like the way you presented this, Don, and I look at it bigger that doing a pitch is sort of doing one of the best, most concise speeches in your life, which is you need a killer opening, you need lots of sexy sound bites, and you need to close on a really high note and letting them know what you want and how you want it. And that's what I liked about taking your slide and leaving it up there. And I think if you kind of look at it that way, that's exactly what you're talking about.
It is, and it's really difficult to have that short, brief statement, be it what do you do, and that's the 10 or 15 seconds that I talked about, or whether it's just doing a full 12-minute presentation. If I were to say to you, if you had a company, can you please write down on a piece of paper what it is your company does in 200 words, you could do that very easily. If I said, would you please write down what your company does in 50 words, it'd be a little more difficult. How about 20 words? That's harder. Okay, you've got a total of 10 words, and that's all you can use. What are they? And it brings to mind the great quote that Mark Twain, the humorist of the 19th century, once had when he wrote a letter to a friend, and he said, "Dear friend, I hope you will forgive the fact that this is going to be a long letter, but I don't have time to write you a short one." So think about that a little bit. And that's part of the challenge of putting that together very succinctly. Mark?
Question. I've heard, and I don't know if it was you or some of your fellow Tech Coast Angel members, but some of you won't invest in a company that you can't explain to your wife. Would you please comment on that?
Well, actually, that statement was made by me, but it was a little different. It's just slightly different than that. I see a lot of deals that sometimes are exceptionally technical, and this is just a personal observation, a personal feeling. I'm not saying this is true for all the other angels, but that are just really far out and very esoteric. A lot of them make a lot of sense, but particularly some of the ones in the life sciences, which is not my background, that are very, very highly technical and so forth. And so early on, I made up my mind that the way I put it was, if I couldn't go home and over a glass of wine tell my wife what the company did, I probably don't have any business writing them a check. So that was just kind of what I did. But that's just a personal observation. I know some people that have indeed written checks to companies, and they've had good luck with the investment and really didn't fully understand. And that doesn't mean that I understand everything about every company I write before, and I may not know how the heck they get from point A to point B, but I know what field they're in, and I know what the problem they're solving, and I know what the need is, and I know what the market opportunities are, and the revenue model, and some of the things like that, and so I understand it. And I can explain what they do, I just can't explain how they do it, and so forth. And I explain why they do it. I know that. So there are features of it that I want to know, but that's what there was. Yes.
Especially like in here, of course, or in a lot of places you have, college students, they have a startup. So are you expecting business plans these days, or is just a fairly detailed PowerPoint kind of a replacement for a business plan?
We don't, that's a really great question from the perspective that this will shock some of you. We really don't read business plans very much. We really look, we'll look at an executive summary. We obviously look at the documentation that will come out in the offering memorandum, and we see more offering memorandums than we do private placements, PPMs, private placement memorandums. We see more offering memorandums, which are more succinct version of that. So we really aren't into a lot, because what we want to hear is an explanation of what it is and how it works and so forth. And a lot of times these business plans are 20 and 30 pages. We just don't have time to read them.
Sure.
So we save on that and don't, and try to go from there with it.
Don, what are your thoughts and the other investors' thoughts on the money that you're investing going to salary for the jockey?
Well, most jockeys have this terrible habit. It's called eating. And they really enjoy doing that, maybe even 3 times a day. I'm being facetious. We understand that the entrepreneur has to have a livelihood. And he or she has probably been working for nothing or very little, or been drawing on their credit card or their second mortgage or whatever it is to get to the point where they are. So we understand that. We also understand, assuming the company is local, that living in Orange County isn't, quite the same as living in Kansas City, where I come from, once upon a time. So, cost of living and so forth. That being said, we don't want it exorbitant, and we don't want it ridiculous, but we recognize that part of the proceeds you're going to have to pay people's salaries. We'll look at that as part of the due diligence, but that's not a showstopper. What is, however, a potential showstopper, and I just had a discussion with somebody about that immediately preceding coming into this presentation today with my last consultation I was involved with, and that is using the proceeds to pay out some dissident shareholders. They've got some partners in this particular company, and the entrepreneur wants to get rid of 3 of them, and he can buy them out, actually 4 of them. He wants to buy them out. And I told him right off the bat, I'm sorry, but angel investors are not going to be happy and not going to be willing to put money to you to turn around and pay it out to somebody else. They want money to go into the company, to grow the company. So salaries, yes. Pay out other people, no.
Right.
Yes.
So out of these 13 mistakes, which one is the most important one that is a showstopper or the deal killers?
Well, clearly, if I don't know what they do, that's going to be tough in the presentation. I mean, you could perhaps have a company that gave more of a sales pitch than an investor pitch, and they still perhaps got some funding or whatnot. But it's an interesting question. I don't know that I've been asked it before, but I'd say the ones that let's just run through here real quick. I would say clearly got to understand what they did, and the hows are pretty important as well. Of course, if the market isn't clear, generally speaking, a good presentation will have that. No, proof of concept, I'd say, is probably the most critical. If they've got proof of concept, they need to present it. But if they don't have proof of concept, then that's going to be pretty damaging. So I would say I would say not presenting, not understanding what it is they do, and not really having a proof of concept, and having a very uninspiring CEO. So didn't give me a chance to fall in love with the jockey. Just off the top of my head, I'd put those as the top three.
Would you watch the presentation for 12 minutes? Do you know right away that you would maybe have willing to work with that company? Or?
I know that I'm interested in learning more. When we have a company present the process of Tech Coast Angels, and this is reasonably typical of other age groups. Number one, they fill out an application online. Number two, the application is reviewed, and probably 80 to 85 to 90% of the applications are invited to what we call a pre-screen. The 5 to 10% that are weeded out on that, or 15%, would be ones that just, it's obvious from the application, or something that a couple people thought up to do last night at a bar and wrote their plan down on a cocktail napkin, and it's just not far enough along. But 85% will get invited to a pre-screen. They come in and pre-screen, meaning they present their deal, it's done on a webinar, and we hear what they have to say, and we look at it, not from the standpoint of do I want to write a check or would I write a check, but is this something that would get traction within our group? For example, if somebody had a great idea for a concept that was a restaurant, sorry, we don't do restaurants, so we wouldn't waste their time to come in and present. So that kind of thing. Of the companies that present to us in a pre-screen, probably about a third of them get invited into a full screening. The 2/3 that don't split into one of two categories. One category is, I'm sorry, but this just isn't something that we think that our members would have interest in, and your time is of value and we don't want to waste it, so we're not going to be able to take it any further. The other is, we think there could be something here, but you need to do the following in order to get it more ready for presentation, and if you're willing to do that and want to come back and re-present to us at a later time, we'll be happy to entertain and have you do so. So that's the way that works. But about a third of the ones that actually presented in the pre-screen will make it into a screening. Then they come to a screening, and from the screening, we take a vote after they leave, and we have our discussion as to those that we'd like to have a deeper dive with. Doesn't mean we're necessarily willing to write a check. We are willing to spend some time with them and talk further. And if they have enough traction, enough people that were interested, and if they have somebody who steps forward and says, if it does come forward, I'm willing to lead the deal, we then at that point in time invite them to go to other networks as well to present to other networks, meaning we have 5 networks in Tech Coast Angels. Orange County, where we were founded, Los Angeles, San Diego, the Inland Empire, and the Central Coast. So those 5 areas here in Southern California all have TCA networks, and they go to those other networks to present as well during the same time that we're moving it forward, doing our due diligence, perhaps leading to creation of a term sheet, negotiating the term sheet, getting all that done. Then we bring them back, they have a final presentation at a luncheon meeting at the 5 networks so that everybody can see what the deal is and understand it, and then we hopefully close within a short order of time following that. The number of companies that start the process with Tech Coast Angels that end up actually getting funded is about 5%. And that's just a rough number. Let me take this one, then I'll come back to Mark. Yes.
Yeah, you talked about sales pitch versus investor pitch. We're so in love with what we're doing that we're probably overemphasizing the sales pitch. Can you talk a bit about the investor pitch, what you like to see in that, define it a little more in detail?
In detail, I apologize, but at 5 o'clock, I'm really going to not start that, because that's about an hour meeting or more that I do with clients at TriTech, as do the rest of my brethren as well. I mean, there's just a whole thing that you want to make sure that you've got in there and what there is and the focus of it. And it's not so much even what you cover, but it's how you cover it. Because you can be talking about a process, but if you keep bringing it back to the revenue opportunities, which somebody buying your product could care less about, but I as an investor care a great deal about, I want to know how that translates into revenue as far as doing this or doing that, or how that translates into cost to you for doing that, and what the payoff is, and the lifetime value of the customer.
and some of the features like that could be in a sales presentation, but you want to parenthetically include that as well in the investor pitch. So it's a long answer to really address that effectively. I can't just rattle off, 10 things you need to have. Okay. Mark?
A real quick question. One of your TCA members, he was from Westlake Village, I heard him make a comment. He said, Techos Angels hunts as a pack and we eat individually. Would you just talk about that and the tranches of funding that the individual members typically put in so they understand?
What Mark's saying is we look at the thing as a group, but each angel member makes their own decision on what they're going to invest in. So it's not we all vote and then the money goes there because we've already put the money into a fund or anything. We look at each individual deal on our own. And generally speaking, there are some exceptions to this, but we generally put around $25,000 minimum into deals. We've got some members that on occasion have put in larger amounts. We have some that don't play a lot, but when they do play, they put in as much as 100, or in one case I know there were a couple times when it's been closer to $200,000. So it's been a little higher value in that regard. And generally speaking, we occasionally will do a seed deal where we'll end up funding 100,000 or even less than that in tranches, but generally speaking, our sweet spot is anywhere from 250 to 750. We've done some $1 million and $1.5 million and $2 million deals, particularly where we've collaborated with other angel groups that we've taken the lead in and done and so forth. So it kind of goes all over the board in that regard. I think perhaps that's a good place to end. Well, quick question, John.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have any comprehensive data on the actual performance, the results through Exis?
I do, but I don't have it off the top of my head. They'll give you John Harbison or Billy. Do you know John?
No.
Okay, he's current chairman of all PCA, but he's done a lot of in-depth study on that in that regard. We did an IRR, and I just don't have that committed to memory, and I don't have it with me. So we do. Fortunately, we do have some successes. Well, Mark, do you want to take it back then?
I would just like a round of applause for such a great. Thank you, Don. Everybody really enjoy this?
Yes.
Yeah, this was awesome. If you didn't get a chance to fill out your survey, we'd greatly appreciate if you need one. Sure. Over here. Okay. And then the other thing I'd like to point out is we have a very special gentleman here that's in the room and a very strategic partner of TriTech. Nick Yaka, would you stand up just for a moment? Nick Yaka is an excellent attorney. We have a great relationship with Nick, and he loves to work with early stage business starts. So before you leave, if you want to, I would suggest that you meet with Nick if you're getting ready to launch your business and you really need a great attorney. So thanks for joining us, Nick. Really appreciate that. So again, awesome job.